Aloha kako, so pleased to be greeting you all from Oahu, Hawaii, Kanaka Maoli land. Welcome back to Bravethrough Live. This celebration event is being cross-posted on several Facebook pages. So thank you to co-hosts KTUH, Ceeds of Peace, Institute for Climate and Peace, Matsunaga Institute for Peace. Please take a moment to share one of these live streams and invite others in your network into the conversation if you would. Please also feel free to begin engaging in the chat box below the live stream video. First, I'd love to have you share where you're watching from. Where is your water and your earth? Please also put questions, any that you might have at any point through this hour, in the chat box below the video or via email at bravethroughs@gmail.com. You can put that in the in email or through the various Facebook feeds, and we will collect your questions to ask to our panelists and guests. So basically, during this brief 1 hour activation, I would love to share pieces of the podcast, but it's not enough time. So I ask all of you, if you haven't already, to please listen to the podcast, listen to the whole series, certainly listen to the wonderful words and stories of our guest today. Today, I look forward to taking you on a reflective journey through the last part of the first Bravethrough series of conversations, and we will sort of deepen our understanding. And our hope for this series in general was to spotlight incredible solutionaries who are finding creative and courageous ways to help us move forward together. And so in bringing these diverse and interesting voices into the studio, we wanted to enliven a sense of possibility in the hearts and minds of those others of you who might contribute meaningfully to problem solving, bridge building, and increase peace and fairness in our communities and in our world. In all of these conversations, the old friends and community leaders with whom I spoke definitely expanded my own spirit and mind, and really helped me to recognize the surprising possibilities that exist that maybe had been too long in the shadows. So today we're going to unpack some of those surprises further, and I hope that you all feel like you come away with an expanded sense of possibility about what you can do, what you want to try, where you're going for information, how you can be engaged. And so may this hour renew your energy and excitement as we still face an uncertain future. But first, maybe if you wouldn't mind also sharing, given that this week is the International Day of Peace, and that this year was commemorated by the United Nations as the Year of Peace and Trust, we would love for you to share your definition of peace building. Over the next week, some of our partners who have helped to sponsor today's event have launched the Peace Out Loud. This is a week of action. So Ceeds of Peace, Institute for Climate and Peace. So let's start, if you can put in the chat, what does peace building mean to you? Now, this can be in the context of your personal and professional experience, or just in general, what comes to mind. No wrong answer. Just name one way that you might be building peace in your communities, or what does peace mean to you? So just take a minute and note that, please. Good. It's good to define peace building for yourselves. I know that you are braving through in diverse and interesting ways, and I expect that everyone has a different definition, but that they are compatible, that they are synergistic, that they support one another. And we need to constantly revive, that commitment. Oh, thank you. our guest today, Kamuela, has said peace building means creating the context and foundations for community-derived abundance. That's lovely. And Grant says peace building is relationship building. Absolutely. So thank you. Keep your definitions in mind and keep them activated. I'm really excited now to have you meet some of our guests. In our first live activation, you met Liam Chin and James Koshiba. And if you've been following along with this series, you also had a chance to hear from Prentice Hemphill, who shared ideas for embodied social justice and racial healing. Today, you'll have a chance to hear from and ask questions of Grande Lum, Kamuela Inos, and Punihei Lipe, maybe Sam Shaltane, if he can make it back in time. Here in Hawaii, where many of us sit, we call this a good talk story, right? We come together for sharing and learning, and let's see where the conversation goes. We have some pre-submitted questions and themes that I'll ask first that deal with peace in the context of personal responsibility toward inspired action, community building, resilience, innovation, and collaboration. And I want to start there. Because community-led and community-sourced solutions are really at the center of all your work, and you're all community problem solvers who source community-led solutions and wisdom. I'd love to hear you speak about community in your lives and efforts. I'll start with Grant. We'll go in the order of your appearance on the series. Grant, you are currently the Provost and VP of Academic Affairs at Menlo College, and you came into this role having worn a number of hats in public service and academia, previously having served as the director of the Divided Community Project at the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law, director of Community Relations Service, which is an agency within the United States Justice Department. And prior to that, you directed the Center for Negotiation and Dispute Resolution while teaching at the University of California, Hastings School of Law. Among other writings, you've authored the Negotiation Field Book, Tear Down the Wall, Be Your Own Mediator in Conflict, and more recently, America's Peacemakers. In your spare time, you are also serving as a senior advisor to the Rebuild Congress Initiative. So you have so much experience. Can you speak a bit more about how you have and continue to facilitate and uplift community-sourced solutions?
Thank you, Maya, and thank you for having me. It's great to be with all these amazing guests that you've brought together. I do want to wish everyone a happy International Peace Day and also a happy Mid-Autumn Festival Day as well, which is this week. If I could, I would give everybody a piece of mooncake here. I want to start. You talk about, I love the term you use, Maya, community sourcing. Yeah, I just want to come for a moment to say, you know, I came to this work because I was a little bit lost. I was lost in law school with this idea of wanting to change community and change society. And I couldn't stand reading all these boring cases. I was falling asleep at night reading these things. And then I, on a lark, became a teaching fellow and a facilitator of a negotiation course. And I found my voice because I was building community in that classroom. I was facilitating other voices, people who I was intimidated by. These were people who were older than I was, who were lawyers and business people. But I found that by being a facilitator, that I could unlock something. And this led me to that career of really thinking of how to bring to the table marginalized voices, people who hadn't had their voice heard. We have, you know, wonderful folks here like Punihei who thought a lot about these sort of things. And, you know, it sounds fancy, terms like facilitation, mediation, but it's not. In some ways, it's going back to community wisdom. It goes back to my grandfather in Toisan in Guangzhou, China, who served as sort of the village elder or in helping people solve their problems. And I've loved that. Whether it was when I was at the Department of Justice and we went into Sanford after the killing of Trayvon Martin and trying to bring together a polarized community where you know, there was issues between white folks and Black folks, and really working with pastors to listen to folks, to have people talk to each other and to facilitate that. and to do that so people could be heard, and that people in a really fractious situation could come together to rebuild their community. The pastors would bring together their congregations, would talk to each other, and it made a huge difference to peace in that community and to rebuild that community as well. You mentioned earlier that I did work with the Divided Community Project. It was really trying to focus on preparation and planning to deal with polarization. It was creating best practices, wisdom in that way as well. And I want to make sure I hear from other guests. I'll just end with, it seems maybe a little bit odd to come to a college, but to me, it's the best place because young people, they're wanting to be heard. They're trying to find their voice. And we are doing that. We're a very small college, less than 1,000 students. And to have small classes, to have community circles for them. I just came from a strategic planning meeting where we had several students helping us plan the future of our campus. So it is really, it's a wonderful place, I think, these are the people that are our future and bring optimism to me. And I really, to me, that's community sourcing. And so I will turn it back to you, Maya.
Thank you so much, Grant. And I'd love to welcome now Kaiwipunikauikawēkiu Lipe. Punihei serves as the Native Hawaiian Affairs Program Officer charged to advance University of Hawai'i at Mānoa's goal of becoming a Native Hawaiian place of learning. She's also the director of UH Mānoa's Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Campus Center, as well as an Obama leader with the Obama Foundation's Asia Pacific Leaders Program. Similarly to Grand Punihei, your work, it is at the intersection of truth, racial healing, indigenous leadership and academia, and the broader community. It's explored the transformative power of restorative justice and community building. What are the community solutions that you see as most important during this time?
Yeah, mahalo Maya, and aloha mai kako, and aloha makamaka mai kalahiki a kalakau, velina nui me ke aloha. Similar to Grania, thank you everyone for being here today and for inviting me to be a part of this, Maya, and the whole team that puts this together, because I know it's a team effort. And aloha a lot of people wakea, having just come out of this time of fall equinox, and really this is a time of setting intention. So thank you for this work. What are the community solutions that I see most important during this time? Mahalo for that question. And I want to start by saying I am a learner of this as well, right? By no means I am a practitioner. I'm a learner, and I just stand on the shoulders of so many before me. I think what I continue to learn and am reminded of as the most important thing that I know is reconnection to Aina. Aina being our land, sea, and skies, to all the things that encompass our natural world. I love the way Mehana Vaughn talks about Aina in one of her writings, thinking about, especially from this idea of academia, thinking about Aina when we go and do research in Aina, and what are we doing in Aina? Are we just extracting from Aina, or is Aina partners, Aina source, is Aina an elder? And so I think of Aina in that way. She also talks about Aina as the people who are rooted in those places, who know that Aina so well, who have eaten from that Aina, that so many generations over and over that they are part of that Aina. And she also talks about Aina as like those ongoing practices in that community. So when I say I think the most important thing we can do during this time is reconnecting with Aina, I really mean all of that in terms of what Aina can be. And I think when we reconnect with Aina, what I have seen, and I'm not just talking about Hawaiians reconnecting with Aina in Hawaii, but people reconnecting with Aina wherever they are. What I have seen and what I have learned is that also that Aina is a kupuna, Aina is an ancestor, as an elder. We begin to reconnect with those elders, and I love that was already spoken of, and that work together, in my humble experience, has taught me that then allows us to reconnect with ourselves and with each other. And I'm still learning how to do that, and I'm still learning how to facilitate that. So again, it's a long journey. But I think that's one of the gifts, our kupuna in Hawaii. And I also want to recognize that we are privileged to still have that practice and memory here. And I know that's not the case for folks everywhere around the world. But I've learned that I think that's one of the gifts that we have in Hawaii to learn from and to share. And so I think that's really important during this time, you know, to reroot, to reground. As my friend and mentor, Mahina Poipoi, talks about, that when you're rooted and, you know, and your feet are rooted in the ground and you know that connection, that then you can pivot, you know, and not lose your way. And so I think about her.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful. And even for those who are not here in Hawaii, you know, there are so many places, I think, that are still where aina, where connection to land, and to kupuna, to elders, and the wisdom of the past of our indigenous communities is still accessible. And that's a great place to think about inviting to the conversation Kamuela Inos, who is the Director of Indigenous Innovation for the University of Hawaii. He focuses on repositioning ancestral practice as contemporary innovation, and in so doing, connecting past, present, future in powerful ways, and thinking about how all of us can begin to access that connection. He previously worked at Ma'o Farms, which is a community-run social enterprise that is multifaceted and works intergenerationally. Kamu, you have worked across multiple community spaces, and in my experience, you always seek to name and share the strength and wisdom of those who have been insufficiently valued in order to discover your innovations, whether they are educational, entrepreneurial, or cultural. So I'd love to ask you, what would you like to add here about the importance of listening to indigenous or frontline communities and treasuring the gifts that such communities bring?
Mahalo, Maya, and hello, everybody. And thank you for letting me be on today. I think I tend to come at it from the perspective of indigeneity as an importance of indigenous voices in conversation, from this lens that you're all indigenous to someplace, and that indigeneity is less of a quote unquote brown people thing that you either can ignore or feel guilty about. But it's more about a state of being in human society and human history when we were hyper localized, when we had deep relationships with a group of people and a living geography. And that there was a trade-off when we adopted these global approaches to, you know, I don't want to poo-poo stuff because I'm talking to you on a laptop, and you know, I have all of these things that we're first world indigenous in Hawaii, right? So we have access to all of these contemporary niceties. But I think the power of indigeneity is reconnecting, is recalibrating, is understanding that everyone's indigenous to someplace, and that hunger that sometimes is felt for authentic relationship to each other and spaces is a deep and profound human need. And that when you understand that you're indigenous to someplace, you reconnect to that. But then the equity part is that when you understand that you're in a place that you're not indigenous to, you have a responsibility to those people to understand their systems. And why that is also super practical. To me, indigeneity is, you know, represents a science and technology and epistemology and understanding a place that has, as we just saw an article today for North America, 21,000 years of R&D at the very least, right? You have very deep ties and practices. And to be able to understand those practices is important, not just out of like virtue signaling, but for really pulling from to frameworks to meet contemporary needs, but also empowering the people of that place who are most likely to not been dispossessed and marginalized, a place to reclaim agency in their own communities, but abilities to engage in broader communities from a strengths-based perspective. And that to me is a seed of peace building, this justice, because it's not toxic niceties, like don't have any bad things, it's be chill. No, it's authentically digging into equity to get peace. Mahalo, Maya.
Mahalo to you. I like what you say, and you give us permission to access the indigenous within, regardless of where we feel rooted. And I think it is a mindset that you're helping us to cultivate, one that is respectful, though it does also have practical dimensions, right? In terms of thinking about the protection and of rights and identities of indigenous peoples and places as well. In all of this, you know, the idea is sort of that we envelop our work in the concept of new futures, KNEW, which expresses a knowing and acknowledgement of the ancestral dimensions of knowledge. And can I ask you and Punihei Kamu, how have you learned, you two, to weave indigenous knowledge of the past into your work, you know, centering Native peoples, lands, and the creation of a future that is more just and reverent towards indigeneity? And how have you learned to bring others along, maybe even those who do not have that awareness, but who may be in positions of decision-making or power?
Kamu, you might quote Anna, so you go first.
I was gonna ask you to go first, Puni. Okay, well, if Puni says, I go. Well, I think I can maybe speak sideways for Puni, but I can definitely speak for myself. I think the thing that me and her share is we're children of, you know, people that have given their lives to just really do the hard work of normalizing indigeneity, right? And my father, Eric Enos, and my mom, Michelle Nui, they're both Native Hawaiians, and they grew up in a generation where super was included Hawaiian. And they fought to make this something that was not just, oh, well, you know, I guess, okay, whatever. To like, no, this is something that people will actually say being Hawaiian is important. And when you're a child of that, being raised in that context, you get a lot of insight, and you tend not to romanticize it as much because it you know, it's really hard, and there was a lot of cost, but there's also a lot of joy. So it leads me to be thoughtful about how we bring others along. And also, I guess at the end of the day, and I think a lot about the ali'i, or those who held the komaha, the burden of leadership in our ancestral past. And I think a lot about, there's a really wonderful book, if you haven't read, it's called Ruling Chiefs by Samuel Kamakawa. It's the story of the story of the state of Kamuela Nui's line. But it tells a lot about one of our chiefs, Umi, was born to a high ranking, the highest ali'i on the island, and a wife who was Maka'ainana, and a person of the land. And they hid the son's royal lineage from everyone. But I always loved the story that every day the son would go and grab fish from his surrogate father's. Father was a Lavaia, a fisher person, grab fish and feed his entourage and the people around him. And he would get cracks for it, but he would do it every single day. And to me, the stories of state are important because they're not fairy tales. Like when George Washington didn't chop down a cherry tree, but they actually are embedded in them, the values and what it means to be Maoli or to be of Hawaiian ancestry. At the end of the day, if you want to have leadership, you have to be exhibited the ability to feed people spiritually, physically, in all the different aspects. So much of how I understand what it means to express my indigeneity is to be a part of feeding as many people as possible, and through the lens of providing them agency and using the stories of our ancestry to remind them of their agency, and then constructing contemporary frameworks, having absolute faith that the systems of our ancestors were refined over millennia to work, and seeing our role in this contemporary time to make it happen. But Punihei probably has something better and smarter to share about than I do.
No, you know, Kamu, you always have all these mic drop quotes. So, but I love to partner with you on these kinds of conversations. You know, mahalo for bringing up your mama and your dad and my mom, and actually my dad too, who led, you know, my mom, Lady Kala Kamuela Inos, and my dad, James Anthony. My mom is Hawaiian from Oahu and Maui, and my father not. He's actually East Indian, born and raised in Fiji, and came here. Well, he basically got kicked out of Fiji and came here and went to college. And, you know, I think about, again, the work that they did so that we could talk about, we could be in this place of real privilege in a lot of ways of kuleana, that we don't have to weave, but we ground in indigenous knowledge. That process I am still learning how to do. Rediscovering my indigenous practices, I am of course still learning how to do, but I don't have to wake up every day and question whether or not, oh, can I add that Hawaiian piece in or not? Ole. We are Hawaii, we start and end there. And that's a gift that they have given us. And so I really want to mahalo you for really pointing that out. You know, Maya, to the question on how have we learned to bring others along, which is something I'm really passionate about and still learning how to do for sure. You know, to Kamu's point earlier about, you know, that everyone's indigenous to somewhere is, my mom always says, everyone has ancestors. No matter where they come from, you have ancestors. And she would always say that before she would give a pule, before she prays and invites her ancestors to guide us. But that idea that is very Hawaii, that, you know, we all have ancestors and they guide us. Again, I think we're really lucky, we're privileged, we're so, you know, that we have this knowledge that has survived that reminds us of that, because I know that not everyone has that. And so I think one of the things that I have learned that helps people bring others along is to invite them into remembering their ancestors. One of my teachers, Professor Miguel Guajardo from South Texas, says, and even if you didn't know your ancestors, imagine them, right? He says, imagine them and look at yourself and look at your, you know, and think about your story and imagine who your ancestors were. And I think that's, you know, that invitation that we are not alone, that we are part of this extremely long lineage before and after us. That mindset, which is very Hawaii, but not just Hawaii, is one way that I have learned to start to invite people along. And then in doing so, doing that work on Aina, in Aina, you know, I've had folks that participate from all around the world in some of the work we do here at Kapapalo'i Okanewai, at our lo'i right here at Mānoa. They could be from, you know, Alaska, and they put their feet in the soil, and there's something about that experience for them that then invites them to remember their own ancestors and to remember that continuity that they are a part of. And so that's part of, I think, some of the things that have helped teach me about bringing others along. But I know I still have lots more to learn.
Thank you both for those very thoughtful and spiritual answers. I'd love to ask this next question of Grande first, but it's really a question for all of you. You're all educators and you're all coming from university spaces at this point. But what can we do as a community in our respective roles as individuals who provide space, assist, and uplift peace-building education? You know, what does it look like to create an educational culture of inclusion? And what skills and practices might we foster in our educational spaces, you know, to really nurture a generation of peace builders.
Thanks, Maya. Whenever I speak with you, I really do appreciate how thoughtful your questions are, and it gets me to pause and reflect, which I think is part of the point, of this. And I just want to say, I really just enjoyed listening to Kamuela and Punihei in talking about groundedness and rootedness in who you are and who your ancestors, because you know what, you gave this question to us to think about earlier, and the one that all of us teach in conflict studies and negotiation and conflict management is, put yourself into the other person's shoes, right? If we really want peace, we have to understand what they think and what they feel, because if we're in an us versus them situation, we're not doing that. We're somehow not doing that. But this is something I was thinking about, but I think Kamuela and Punihei made me think about it in a slightly different way, which is, I do think when it gets hard, especially when you feel under attack, right? That's why we're polarized. That's why we don't, we demonize the other side. And I actually am starting to think more about, before you can put yourself in the other person's shoes, you have to be grounded and stand in your own shoes in a certain way. Because here's a difficult example, right? And I know Maya's worked on this issue, and I have too. Is the anti-Asian violence that has been an epidemic over this past year, and it's hard, right? As a person who comes from a group that has been historically marginalized in this country, when you're attacked, there's a feeling of wanting punishment, of wanting to get back at them, to throw them into jail or whatever it might be. But I do think it's important to say, why am I so angry? What it's because, right, my fear for my own parents, my fear for my children, right? It comes from all those places that we have, that I have. And then I think, right, then the challenge is, if this is about justice and peace, what does that actually mean? Do I demonize the other side, or do I try to really understand the perpetrators in these situations, and to understand that sometimes it comes from desperation, that it comes from a place of a lack of hope, and is there a possibility of real and true understanding? And I think that is the harder place to go, and I think that's an important thing our communities have to do in this situation, to look for the bigger solution, and not to be satisfied with the immediate gratification, of something here. So I think that's important, right? Once I can understand where my own pain is coming from, then can I look at a situation and truly live restorative justice, right? What will make this better? You mentioned that I'm a senior advisor to Rebuild Congress. Our partisan identities are getting very difficult. We are demonizing people from the other party, and how do we understand what is driving our anger and our fears, and then can we understand the anger and the fears of the person who happens to be from another party? And I'll stop there.
And can I say that inherent in what you're just saying is also not just that we need to understand our own fears, our own concerns, our own worries, but also, come from a strength-based approach, understanding the beauty, the bounty, the gifts, the possibilities that we possess, and to think about perhaps instead of simply punitive measures, how can we lift up, fortify our own communities, our own cultures, and to take the vulnerabilities, to understand the strength, so that we are less afraid, so that we can come from a place of knowing our gifts and in that there is still vulnerability. We have to lean into our discomfort sometimes, but it enables us to perhaps behave generously and thoughtfully when it comes to complex problems and to others. I really think that that is at the heart of the truth and reconciliation work that you do, Punihei. You know, you begin with that strength-based approach when you think about transformation. And can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just really love this conversation around understanding self, but self in the center of, or in the continuum, right, of these many, many lineages, these many genealogies that shape us. And so I think, you know, talking about the truth and racial healing work, and also to the question around, you know, what does this education look like, right? And this inclusivity is how do we invite, I mean, the work that we do, especially starting with truth, right? Like starting with the Hawaiian word for genealogy, mo'oku auhau, the idea that we are thinking about the many genealogies that shape us, inviting that to the table, inviting me and bringing and allowing me to bring all the pieces of who I am, all the ancestors that I have, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and recognizing that that is part of who I am and what I bring in those lessons. Like, that's the education that I want for my children. You know, that's the space that I am trying to, you know, cultivate here, you know, at Mānoa, because that's what diversity is about, right? You don't just want my brown face. I don't just want my brown face. I want me to show up with all that other stuff too, because that is the beginning of healing ourselves, so that we can be in relationship, like I'm saying, with others, right? I cannot see you if I cannot see me. You know, that's hard. And so I'm just really excited about, you know, that piece of what's being said here. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to think about, and how we cultivate, you know, this idea of truth. It's not just me then being able to share my story, but it's, can you receive it? Do you have what you need to be able to really hear me? Right. And so I know there's a lot of work that goes on around, like, I want to tell my story, but if it falls on deaf ears, that can be even more harmful. And so how are we cultivating that healing work, that peace work within ourselves, so that you can receive me, so that we can be in relationship, so that you can hear my truth, and receive that. And I think that I'm still a student of this, but learning that that's such an important piece, because like I said, what we experience too often is trying to share our truths, and then nobody catches it, nobody receives it, and that is so hurtful. So really inspired by that kind of work that's happening across our communities right now. Thank
you both. I'd love to turn to Kamu now again, you know, and feel free to answer that question about education as you are answering this next one as well. But Punihei, you've already spoken about connecting to Aina, to land, to earth. And one thing that I love about your work, Kamu, is also that you have done a lot to help others, especially young people, to connect to earth as ancestor, to Aina as their inheritance. And the Institute for Climate and Peace is one of the partners helping to host the live stream of this conversation. For instance, brings together these spaces that are seemingly distinct, right? Until you start illuminating the layers of the issue. And so I think about being a steward of people, of communities, but also being a steward of the land and of the Aina and you know, somehow in your work, those two things, they come together, just like the climate and peace work does for environmental justice. So I'd like to ask you to start with, and others can chime in, you know, and in what ways has nature been a guide for your work? Has the natural world and its wisdom been an inspiration? And in what ways can all of us, begin to tap into that? And one of the questions that we've had in the chat is sort of, other than looking at the lo'i, the kalo, the ancestor of tarot, what are other suggestions for connecting to Aina?
Oh, okay. I think for me personally, I'm lucky that I kind of have a third parent. My father and a bunch of his peers occupied land in the back of Waianae Valley, and they brought water back down to ancient lo'i, or traditional agrarian complexes that are hundreds of years old, as part of their practice. So I was always up there, and you learn a lot reading for hours and doing that type of work, the physical involved part of it. And I think that connection, it taught me, like, people say your dad's a tarot farmer. He actually wasn't. I never think of my dad as a tarot farmer, because our kupuna and our ancestors, the reality of it was there was no word for nature. That there wasn't something that existed outside of you. That's a contemporary construct, and it's the byproduct of an industrialized world where it is a commodity. In ancestral practices, like, the world around you was a living, vibrant thing that you interconnected with on a daily basis, and what was sacred was also practical. So I think the connectivity, and so therefore, I guess the part that is really important to understand about contemporary interventions that we've designed is there was a symbiosis that existed for hundreds of years and is backed up by scientific rigor. If you start looking at macroepidemiology and the way our genetics itself has evolved along with our soil, the work like a Dr. Kamuela is doing, for example. If you understand that when this symbiosis is severed, naturally both sides of it hurt. The people hurt and the landscape hurt. And the inclination is to come in after the fact by the people who created the severance. Part of them feel really bad and they want to help. Totally get it, super awesome. But they'll try to help in silos. They'll try to do environmental work on one hand and then do social work on the other. But for Native people, there is no way that you can heal. There are not enough drug treatment clinics or prisons to rehabilitate people who've been severed from their land, nor is there enough ways that you can practice fortress ecology and conservation and wall things off and grow the valleys back. That is not what these islands have attuned to around thousands of years, right? You have to figure out, how do you rebuild that relationship? And the hallmark of indigenous practice, which I learned because I had to, was work. One of my greatest mentors, Auntie Nani Burgess, always says, work is medicine. It's dignity, it's identity. And therefore, so much the work we've been centered in is how do we reclaim the notion of work? Because at the end of the day, you can't talk about peace if you don't talk about power. And being raised in a violent, impoverished community, you learn really quickly about power, where peace building and stuff could be something that happens outside of where you're from, but this sure as ain't happening in Waianae. So how do you understand that to be in the space to build peace, you have to build power, but how do you build power? Is by restoring people to their purpose and figuring out how do you use your ancestral systems to become powerful. And power is very different, I think, in English than it is in Hawaiian, because Hawaiian is mana. And Hawaiian power acts like water. Power has to flow, and power, the benchmarks and metrics of achieving power, people are fit and landscape is abundant. You don't have that in contemporary systems. Power is an individual pursuit. Ancestrally, those who led, if they wanted to keep leading and being alive, they had to make sure that people were working and the landscape was flowing, because chiefs who presided over starving people were very quickly and unceremoniously ex-chiefs, and people rose up and killed them. So I think this idea of restoring agency is the central core of peace building, and the idea of restoring agency in a Hawaiian context, and I imagine everywhere, is restoring people's relationship with the living practice with the land. And I guess the last thing I'll say is the most important way to the question about kilo, the most important way to build a relationship with land is with someone else. You have a personal relationship, and that's great, but land asks for multitudes, and being part of restoring as many people as possible, regardless of where they're from, to the majesty of what their ancestors did, regardless of where you're from, and to be able to live in place is a powerful healing element. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Kamu. Anyone else want to add before we get to our final question? No, it's good. That was a very full and rich answer, so thank you. So listeners, if you are just joining us for this Bravethrough Hour, but you have not listened to the podcast in their entirety, please do. I hope your interest is piqued. You don't want to miss the full conversations with these guests. They are streaming now on KTUH's SoundCloud and many, many other platforms. I want to get to any questions that have been asked in the various chats and Facebook feeds. So feel free, if you haven't already, to drop your thoughts there now, and we will share those with the panel. But I want, as you are doing that, and before we get to the audience questions for the last 10 minutes, just to say that, you know, this is an opportunity to celebrate the fact that we do have thoughtful, courageous innovators, and we really want you to think of yourselves as peace builders and as Bravethrough people, and to know that you're not alone. And there's so many with whom we can connect. We should. With this series of conversations, I really want to make sure that we don't go back to this sort of stuck place. So let's please have more conversations. Share with me, you know, thoughtful, Bravethrough people who I should be interviewing. Let's not walk down narrow pathways and do things the way they've always been done. Open the windows instead. Let's walk out the doors. You know, let's climb the summits and trees to find new vistas that are expansive and to break down barriers in our minds and our spirits about what's possible for our individual and collective future. So with that, I have one final question. As you know, all of you are activists, you're hardworking people, and since we look at personal peace, interpersonal peace, and community peace, we do have to remember the importance of harvesting personal peace as we do work with and for others. And there is no shortage of opportunities to engage and do more. At the end of the day, in what ways are we cultivating personal peace? So I offer this as the last question to you, all three of you, to help our dear listeners to, you know, since peace is not just what we do for others, but it's also what we do for ourselves, so that we have that still center, so that we know ourselves, so that we have the strength to carry on. So in closing, can we hear from all three of you? Please share with us your personal peace practice, and then we'll get to some other questions.
Who would you like to go first, Maya? We're all.
Why don't you go first, Grant?
I would pick up on a couple things. The part of questions that stuck with me was, you're all hardworking, you're trying to make a difference out there, and how do you find personal peace? I do think it is hard. You become, I have all these to-do lists of all these things I want to do every day to accomplish something, you know, out there. And one practice, it's that I think my wife Nan has help me with is that, you know, you're focused on change out there. How do you focus on, you know, within the family? And what I've tried to do is, you know, I make my list, and I have my list on my iPhone each day, is to make sure I move to the top of the list for each day something that has to do with my family, to call my daughter in New York, to do something with my wife later that day. So that makes a difference, to say what is, you know, what matters, you know, what, and to prioritize things that build for yourself. And that's made a difference. And you know, we had a conversation around land, and I do think, you know, how do we get unstuck is by being a part of the land. For me, you know, in this pandemic, we've gone for hikes in wherever, you know, whatever we can, and that gets me unstuck, right? That gets me out of my head and into my body and into my heart and into my soul. So you know, that's important. And some sort of morning, the last thing I'll end is some sort of morning practice right after I wake up, and some sort of practice before I go to sleep, you know, whether it's a little bit of yoga or it's trying to do a meditation of some sort. That helps have the personal peace to be able to do the work.
Thank you. Punihei, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah. Two things I've been working on lately. And it's hard work for me. It's hard work. One is paying attention to my body, to what I am actually feeling, and taking care of that. I'll give an example. The other day I was in a really rough meeting, and this is connected to the second point. And I was literally shaking. And actually, I was driving on the freeway, you know, as most of us do on calls, safely with my phone, but I was shaking so bad because the stress of the meeting was so bad that I could barely keep my foot in the pedal. That was really scary. When I could safely pull over, I did, and paid attention to my body. And I didn't try to judge it. I didn't try to ignore it. I tried to actually lean into it and wonder, okay, what is going on? And how can I take the lessons that my body is telling me to take care of myself and to take better care of the situation. And you know, it's not always bad feelings that I'm having in my body, so I want to point that out. But paying attention to what my body is telling me, because it's an intelligent being, and it is the being of many ancestors, you know, in this present form. So I'm trying to do that better. The second part of that, in that particular story, but in other stories as well that I'm, you know, have experienced lately, is speaking my truth about that. So in that meeting, I said, you know, I need to tell you, dear person, that, you know, my body is being extremely harmed by what you are saying and doing at this moment. And that's a really hard practice for me, to speak my truth, whether it is a positive thing or a negative thing in the moment. But that means I have to be present with myself. And that is a huge, huge piece of work for me that I know is important if I want to do anything else with anyone else, especially my family. And then of course, my community. So being able to speak that truth part in a way, whether or not it can be heard, but that I can hear it first and foremost, is really hard work, but I think really worth it. So thanks for asking, Maya.
Mahalo. And Kamu?
Mahalo e Punihei for sharing that. Thank you, Juan, and for the heart in which you shared that. I'll be really brief. I think for me, the first is I go to a therapist, and I want to normalize more cis male Hawaiian men to go to therapists. And I've been going to a therapist for 2 years. It's been super helpful. And it's helped me to, honestly, I don't give a crap about political sovereignty or food sovereignty unless we have emotional sovereignty, that we're not barfing our activism upon people, and that we understand that our experience of pain is a very personal thing, but we have to be responsible for the mana. Because anything we do with that level of hate it's like cooking. You're going to put that into your food. You're going to put that into your practice, and your legacy will be hate and hurt. So I think we have to make the onus to heal so that we can do the work of building. And the second part is, as a child of activists, I've had it pointed out that doing stuff for your family is no longer sufficient. You need to do stuff with your family. And I've made it a point that my weekends are sacred, and I do whatever the crap my kids want to do. Wonderful stuff, like my son's learning fencing. So I think those are two really healing things that I take the time to get help, and then I also take the time to be with my children. So mahalo for asking that.
Mahalo. Thank you to all three of you for your honesty, your clarity, your vulnerability, your integrity as people and as leaders. And I'd like to now just say that there have been a lot of beautiful comments in chat. Meredith says that she loves your stash, Kamu. So, no, but there have been complimentary words in the Facebook. But in the event that any of you have additional questions, we will get that, get them to the panelists later, and maybe they can, write in the Facebook feed. But so sorry that if we're missing one, don't see other questions on there at present. This is a wonderful opportunity for me to introduce one of my favorite people, therefore, Zephanie. Zephanie is the producer of the Bravethrough Live series. She is a remarkable and wonderful, delightful human whom I adore. And she offers a lot of support to me, to the guests, and also just in her other work to the community of peace builders here in Hawaii and elsewhere. So I'd like to thank her for partnering with me for the last several months to make this a reality. We've learned a lot together, and she has a rich background working at the intersection of government, education, advocacy, diplomacy. This includes a number of roles in public service across government, at every level of government, elected, appointed, local, international. She currently serves as the youngest ever trustee to the NAACP Foundation and on various boards internationally related to the United Nations, as well as locally with the Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Coalition of Hawaii. So I'd like to just have her come on and say aloha, please.
Yes, aloha everyone. And first and foremost, as I close out this series with so much gratitude, my heart is overflowing. Gratitude to you, dear Maya, dear Auntie Maya, as many of us call you, our brave and generous host, for your vision, for bringing all of us along on this beautiful and stimulating journey into our communities and into the communities we serve and communities nationwide. I've learned so much from you, and I'm so honored to have been invited to work alongside you on this incredible series. Thank you very much to the wonderful and kind folks who've worked with us and made the technology both affordable and accessible and digestible to us. The student staff at CSSDS, Sherry, Lucas, Ari, and the team at KTUH, and all of our broader ohana who may have encouraged or advised us along the way. There are so many of you, and your contributions, your feedback, your ideas have been so dearly appreciated and valued by us. So thank you so much for supporting Bravethrough. Thank you to each of our co-host organizations for sharing these conversations with your community: Seeds of Peace, Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, the Institute for Climate and Peace, Peace Studio, and of course, KTUH FM Honolulu. Thank you to each of you for the work you do all year long to inspire and cultivate peace and well-being courageously in communities worldwide, communities that now more than ever need each of you who are watching to take a stand and use your voice to affect positive and sustainable change, whether in your own lives or in your families or within your spheres of influence and service, to build peace, to build power, as Kamu reminded us. And that we see that as our personal charge, our personal responsibility that we're seeking out tools like these conversations and the handbooks and writings that our guests like Provost Lum have put out so that they're available to us when we need them for learning and empowerment. We say we just want to do something, but where do I start? The Seeds of Peace toolkit. So many tools are available to us. And so I want to especially thank from the bottom of our hearts each of the guests in this series, James and Liam, who you heard from back in July, Grande, Punihei, Prentice, Kamuela, Sam, the organizations that you all serve. Your voices have given us inspiration and strength. And so we honor you and your courage and dedication to service. And so with that charge, this invitation we leave you with to take action. We thank you, our listeners, this wonderful global community of ordinary, extraordinary peace builders at Bravethrough. You found us online and all these different platforms. You've listened, learned, taken action in brave new ways. And we want to continue to hear from you, as was just stated. So please do share your ideas, share your actions, keep in touch with us. Now you can pick up your phone, go text somebody, see how they're doing, connect, share what you learned today, perhaps. We're working to make these conversations more accessible through transcription, and we've set up a basic website where you can find some of those tools that were linked to each of the episodes on SoundCloud. Go to tinyurl/Bravethrough. So we just truly hope that this series has ignited and sparked something for you, and we very much look forward to working alongside each and every one of you to build a more peaceful and just world that works for everyone and leaves no one behind. So we'll see you online, and we'll see you on the front lines. Mahalo and aloha. Good evening.